The final episodes of Game of Thrones, Daenerys Targaryen and Cersei Lannister have an intense and paralyzing loathing for each other. This is primarily because each woman is a massive threat to the other. Cersei earns the hatred of Dany quite easily. She murders Missandei, kills one of her dragons, and devours her armies as well as numerous allies. Daenerys wants what Cersei has, the Iron Throne. In the second last episode, these two women go head to head, thus ensuring the slaughter of King's Landing. Game of Thrones has always had its fair share of conflicts and bitter rivalries. Many characters, especially Peter Baelish and Cersei, are selfish and motivated by their own desires, not by any greater ideology or purpose. Whilst not as villainous, we can notice a similar absence in the Stark and Tyrell families. Very few characters are ideological, with the exception of the Faith Militant and Daenerys Targaryen. In the world of Westeros, there is a widespread skepticism towards religion and belief. Yet, for a medieval-inspired show, this is quite a modern attitude to have. This video will analyse the portrayal of ideology in Game of Thrones, whether it is religious or political. I'll also compare it to the Middle Ages, a period in time where beliefs and ideas mattered. I'm Madeleine Jones, and I study history, literature, and culture. Welcome to Snowy Fictions. The biggest way Game of Thrones portrays ideology and belief wrong is by pretending it doesn't exist or doesn't matter. Most, if not all, of the characters roaming Westeros are motivated by their own interests or that of their house. This is made clear in the Lannister family, where Tywin and Cersei have ambitions, yes, but they are fundamentally self-serving. The Lannisters, with the exception of Tommen and Lancel, are completely divorced from political philosophy and religion unless it involves getting what they want. There's nothing necessarily wrong from this from a storytelling point of view, but they are not alone in this. The Tyrells, Greyjoys, Arrynts, and Baratheons are also agnostic towards belief and thought. Both Stannis and Renly Baratheon are presented as wanting to rule with honour and be good rulers for Westeros, as does Robb Stark and later Jon Snow. But that's it. These are smart, brilliant men, capable of military success and at times winning the hearts and minds of their people. Yet, the kings lack innovation. These aren't deep thinkers who muse on philosophy and theology. It is also true that medieval kings and princes could be like this too. Take Philip the Fair in France, who certainly had a knack for strategy, even when it meant burning the Knights Templar. Likewise, the Middle Ages produced notable strategists and generals who were ambitious and diligent in how they approached warfare. Charles Martel of the 8th century AD, who helped expel the warring Arab dynasty in southern France, proved the importance of strategy and talent regarding one's security. Because of this, we should view the Middle Ages as a time of not only faith and religion, but also one where individuals applied clever ideas and solutions to ongoing problems. Returning to Game of Thrones, the characters exist in a world devoid of ideas and, dare I say, faith. There are religions, sure, yet most of the characters have a skepticism towards these faiths. This is best shown in the Sept explosion in Season 6. Marjorie, correct and wise, chides the Sparrow for listening too much to the Seven Gods and not to the realities of Cersei's true nature. To clarify, I'm not just talking about official religions here. One can engage in ideology and belief without subscribing to a formal, organized religion. Daenerys Targaryen is a fantastic example of this, and someone who bucks the show trend here. She has a clear vision and perception on an ideal future, and in addition has fierce convictions and a sense of right and wrong. Sure, it's not necessarily a morally desirable one. Daenerys can get harsh, which ultimately culminates in tragedy for King's Landing, but she has motivations that exist outside of herself, whereas all 5 of the kings in the war over Westeros are somewhat passive in their rulership, often deferring to wise, more realistic men like Tyrion Lannister. Daenerys, however, demonstrates the power of ideology and one's vision. By contrast to, say, Robb Stark or even Joffrey Baratheon, Daenerys is the most radical individual in the show. There are other believers too, whether it is in a vision or a faith. Melisandre is a terrific example, as she is devoted to the Lord of Light and is capable of frightening prophecies and blood magic. She also has status and is close to Stannis Baratheon and later Daenerys Targaryen, as well as Jon Snow. Unfortunately, Melisandre is quite passive in her worldview, which is a shame because it is quite interesting in religious history when the believer takes the initiative. There's a crucial difference, though, between actual medieval history and the depiction of belief and ideology in Game of Thrones. The Middle Ages gives us ideologues, theologians, radicals, heretical revolutionaries, and political thinkers. From the Cathars in southern France to the Holy Roman Empire, it mattered what Europeans thought and believed in. These were not isolated examples, as Game of Thrones depicts, with just a handful of devout characters. We only need to compare Game of Thrones to medieval history to understand this. In Game of Thrones, the beliefs and ideas of individuals rarely move the plot forward. Sure, Tyrion will slap Joffrey and at the end help build a somewhat electoral monarchy system. Likewise, Varys the Spider is motivated to protect the realm and serve the people. Yet, these goals are not necessarily ideological, whether in a political or religious sense. Varys' worldview is entirely brought on by his observations and what he has seen, as well as his own virtues and moral worldview. This is somewhat ideological, but not completely. In my view, ideology, whether political, religious, or philosophical, extends well above an individual and his or her life. We shouldn't confuse having opinions to being ideological. A good example of medieval ideology and belief comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, whose unfinished Summa Theologia covers nearly all aspects of the human experience, whether it is liturgy, war, marriage, child-rearing, and governance. Ideology, by its very nature, is idealistic. Game of Thrones, I believe, is too cynical for that. Here, there are clear boundaries between the religious, the political, and the people. This isn't necessarily wrong or bad storytelling. It's also true that the Middle Ages did have skeptical characters who viewed various actions, whether by the kings or the Pope, with disagreement. However, there has always been this ambiguity between religion, the politics, and the people. Game of Thrones, being a show primarily focused on political drama, at least in the earlier seasons, at times neglects the importance of ideas and faith. The end results are characters uncaring and apathetic towards these elements. To clarify, there are political movements and groups which are like that today. It's certainly a common criticism libertarians and neoconservatives have gotten over the past decades from left and right-wing commentators. But it's not common in the Middle Ages, a time where ideas, religions, and ideologies had massive political consequences. That's why certain events, such as the schism in the 11th century between Byzantine and Roman Christianity, had massive political ramifications, as seen in the Northern Crusades and the Battle of the Ice in 1215 AD, as well as in the hot, arid desert of Arabia. Religions frequently clashed with one another, whether it was Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Manichaeism, or Islam. Under Mehmed the Conqueror from the Ottoman Empire, who took Constantinople, the most cherished cathedral of Orthodox Christendom, the Hagia Sophia, was converted into a mosque. Likewise, the Reconquista in Spain saw the keys to the Cordoba Mosque handed to Catholic rulers. Why do this? Because ideas and identity matter. George R. R. Martin is more interested in exploring the personal motivations, greed and selfishness, power and ambition which animated the Middle Ages. There is nothing wrong with this, but it's not a complete depiction of what it meant to be an individual living in medieval times. Game of Thrones, after all, is a contemporary TV show based off books first released in the 90s. The West enjoys, or suffers, the fruits born from secularism, internationalism, and liberalism. These three can sometimes contribute to the delusion we, as Westerners, are no longer in an era of belief or dogma. You certainly see this from Steven Pinker and Sam Harris, two rationalistic and skeptic writers who view the world as improving from Enlightenment ideals and scientific principles. I don't share this view, and personally believe the West has many ongoing misconceptions about ideology, religion, political philosophy, and faith. These forces are underestimated in modern society, whereas quantitative economics and self-motivated ambitions, while existing and are clearly important, are usually overestimated. Game of Thrones is an example of this tendency. This is a problem because both Game of Thrones and George R. R. Martin present themselves as commentary on the Middle Ages. I've also noticed a trend from historians and literary scholars where ideology, religion, and belief are underplayed during the Middle Ages. The clearest example comes from the act of converting to another religion. For example, both Olga and Vladimir of the Rus in Kiev, which eventually formed the lands today of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, have their conversion to Christianity viewed with excessive skepticism and self-interest, according to historians. This is not without a good reason, due to the economic and diplomatic climate in the 10th century. Yet, there's a need to strike a balance between the ideological and theological side of religion and culture, with the benefits that come from belonging. George R. R. Martin is not the only one who does this. In historical fiction, recent novels from Lauren Groff and Emma Donoghue fall into this trap of divorcing medieval ideas from their characters. Whilst there are challenges in writing about medieval Christendom, in this contemporary age, I must call for more careful depictions of religion, ideology, and belief. Sure, one may identify as a secular liberal living in the West, but this doesn't make you exempt from ideology and general religiosity. I only hope Writers of historical or fantasy fiction, remember that. What are your thoughts on Game of Thrones? Do you share my concerns about the depiction of ideology and belief? Comment below. I'd love to start a discussion. I also have many classes on creative writing on Skillshare, links below, and if you'd like, subscribe for frequent videos about history, literature and culture. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.